Anyone not see it?
I didn't get this information till very last minute, so I have
Okay,
not
all
read
right.
it in
All
depth.
right,
So
well,
I
why
would
don't we have our
appreciate
Inspector
a
General?
presentation, but
All right, let's have our, I think Ricardo's suggestion is well taken. Let's hear from our Inspector General.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. So my office took a look at, we compared not only 8 cities within California, what they were doing regarding ICE policy, but we also looked at the California Senate Bill 54, SB 54, and we also looked at the Trust Act as well as the Truth Act. So we were comparing those three things. We came up with 6 areas where there are gaps between the policy and the state law and peer best practices. I'll just go through each one very briefly. The first one is the clarification of warrants. So again, we're talking about the difference between the judicial warrant and administrative warrant. So many California agencies clearly define the difference between judicial and administrative warrants, and IC-10 as well. However, the policy lacks explicit definitions regarding judicial and administrative warrant. The second portion of it would be prohibition on ICE using OPD facilities. So this would be any facility, or I should say city facility. Um, SB 54 provides law enforcement agencies from providing, I should say, SB 54 prohibits law enforcement agencies from providing office space specifically. Chula Vista is one of the cities we looked at. They also kind of reinforced that prohibition was inside their policy. The policy draft that OPD has did not have such language, so the draft currently does not specify any specific prohibition on the use of police property for federal or for ICE. The third thing we looked at was the participation in federal task force. So some of the agencies, Chula Vista, Long Beach, Sacramento, they specifically restrict participation from immigration task force, OPD being on a ICE task force. Now, the law, SB Senate Bill 54, does permit participation only when the immigration portion is not a primary factor. So that's another thing that we looked at. The next thing is guidance on request from DHS or ICE. And so some of the 8 agencies we looked at specifically defined what types of actions are permissible. Anaheim, Long Beach, they also included language on how to handle requests from federal immigration. Um, and this includes traffic control. However, the draft policy that OPD has provides only general information about referring ICE requests, but does not discuss responding to requests like traffic control and things like that. And then 2 other areas that we looked at is the mandatory reporting under California DOJ. SB 54 does require that the law enforcement make uh, transfers to immigration authority to disclose that in a report to California DOJ. Other jurisdictions like Anaheim, Chula Vista, I Sacramento, Santa Ana, and Stockton have mandatory reporting, but the draft that OPD has does not include any guidance or requirements on reporting to the California DOJ. And then we have finally the restrictions on data sharing and technology. So some of the agencies in California, like Long Beach and Chula Vista, restrict like ALP, license plate reader, mobile ID, and facial recognition from being transferred to ICE. The state law prohibits sharing personal information, and that's defined under the Values Act. But yet the draft does include a prohibition on sharing of non-public information, but does not discuss prohibitions against releasing personal information as defined in state law. And then there are some miscellaneous things that I discussed before about the draft where they use Federal Department of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. There's no such thing as Federal Department of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It's Department of Homeland Security that and ICE is underneath that. And then the draft also refers to section Penal Code section 6, 7, 9, 10, and they incorrectly cite a different code. So just looking at that draft of Penal Code, take a look at 6, 7, 9, 10. That's incorrectly stated inside the draft. And overall, that's basically a summary of what we've taken a look at and how we compared this policy with other policies and the law.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Inspector General. All right. Do any of the ad hoc commission members have any comment on the memo as presented by our Inspector General?
I have a question. So thank you, Inspector General Malou, for the memo and your analysis. You mentioned you only reviewed California policies or other cities in California. I wonder if there's the benefit in taking a look at Minnesota. It feels like Minnesota is the hotspot of what is actually happening with ICE. And I think we have an opportunity to learn from what they are doing over there and what they've tried. So I would encourage us to maybe look beyond California to see what other hotspots, for lack of a better word, and what cities and how police departments are responding accordingly. My second comment is, and maybe we'll get to this later, but I'm wondering around like what happens when ICE commits a crime, and if that is something that needs to be stated in the policy or if that lives elsewhere. I think we are in a very unique moment where things are being escalated, and we have to sort of make sure that we account for that.
Okay, let me jump in here for a quick moment. I think both of those comments are very good comments, but I think in the interest of getting this process rolling in little chunks, I want to just deal with the Inspector General's observations. Maybe we get authorization today to get that to our attorney to start drafting those things. And I don't think that'll take very long to get that because, again, because of the thoroughness of the report. And then I think the very important issues you brought up, we're going to need to discuss those because, clearly what's going on in Minnesota may have some teachable moments for us. I don't know if their state law parallels California's or not. I think the thornier issue and one that we're going to have to discuss is what language do we put in a policy that addresses violations of law? And I think everyone is struggling with that all over the country. We're going to have to give some real thoughts to that. So I'd like to just kind of set that aside for a few minutes and just address the Inspector General's memo, the points he raises, so we can give our council direction immediately to get the show on a road, kick the horse or spur the horse or shoot the starting gun or whatever we need to do to get this thing rolling because we don't have much time. And I don't mean to discount anything that you're saying, but I want to handle them separately if that's okay.
I understand that. And I just want to clarify my comment. I wasn't talking about statewide law. I was referring to the policy that the department has implemented as a result of what is happening in Minnesota. So at the, not sure what city they're in, but the policy that the department has. So less so the statewide, but more so of the policy that the department has adopted as a result of ICE.
Okay. All right. Any other commissioners who would like to weigh in on Inspector General Malouf's memorandum?
I just like to thank the Inspector General's office for getting us going on this direction because this was going to be one of our first tasks to be able to start doing a review. So I think you've given us a good advantage and step forward, given the time constraints that we do have. And I really am curious as a learning opportunity to hear kind of OPD's thoughts on each of these areas because just in conversations that we've had with the department and some conversations we've had here, it feels like some of these things are aligned, and I'm not sure if they live within our current policy or within the Protect the Town executive orders that the mayor's put in. But I do think that, we allude to the other administrative instructions and things like that, but I think it's going to be important for us to be very specific and have tangible things of what the department will and will not do within our own policy. So I appreciate this as a starting point, and happy to hear from other panelists, and then turn it over to OPD so we could kind of go through some of these and see what some of the initial thoughts are from this.
Do you have any other ad hoc members who'd like to weigh in at this point?
Yeah, we have James Wood with his hand up as well.
And hand up, I don't know what happened to my video, so I apologize for that. Anyway, I thought this was an excellent summary and recommendation of what needs to be done. On the definitions of immigration enforcement, we're limiting ourselves to ICE. And there are a number of other federal government agencies that are involved in immigration enforcement that perhaps that we should spell out as well. That includes Border Patrol, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, and Customs and Customs and Border Protection, all involved in immigration enforcement, detainers, and other various items. So,
okay, I think that's a good suggestion. Maybe we define we define it so it captures all of the federal immigration enforcement mechanisms, and then we just have a defined term, ICE, and so that
right.
ICE captures everything.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay, anyone else?
Can I just interject? I think that is a good idea, especially Border Patrol, because Border Patrol does a lot what ICE is doing, but they are focused more on the border. But I don't think using the general term ICE would be as good as using the general term DHS, because DHS, Homeland Security, it does truly encompass all of those agencies. But if we refer it to as ICE, technically it'd be a little bit wrong.
I think that's a good suggestion. You kind of alluded to that in your memo. I just wanted, I think that was Mr. Wood's comment. I just want to make sure we put language in there that captures everyone, all of the agencies. And by the way, it was several months ago, but there were Customs and Border people operating outside of their jurisdiction. Actually, they both in California and I believe someplace in the Midwest, where they were actually sending them not to enforce the border, but to do other things. So I think that's an excellent suggestion. Anyone else?
More of a question. I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull up another one documents. IG, did you also when you were doing this review, did you also look at the memorandum provided by Councilmember Wong? Because I'm seeing some overlap in here. I'm kind of crosswalking it right now, and it looks like there's definitely some overlap. And these are the ones that you highlighted, taking the different proposals, highlighting. Maybe talk half a quick second of kind of your process.
Yes, sir.
Just to update folks.
I'm glad.
A couple new members.
Apologize. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. We did take a look at what Councilmember Wong had suggested. We did implement that in the policy. To be honest with you, I haven't read it again, so I can't really, I can't remember off the top of my head some of the points that she made, but it is incorporated in my memo.
Great. Okay, cool.
Anyone else before we hear from members of the public? Okay, are there any attendees who have a brief comment on the memorandum that our Inspector General did, keeping in mind that it's my intention to entertain a motion to forward the OIG's report to our attorney to start incorporating the issues he's raised into the ordinance, so we get that going, and then we can talk about some of the broader issues that our committee member Salto raised.
I'm
If
looking
you'd
right now. I don't,
like to speak, then please raise your hand
it
and
looks like we have a comment in the chat from Millie that said Border Patrol has not been limited to the border. Okay, that was from our last comment. And then we have Ann and Millie with their hands up. So let's get some brief comments from the public, and then we can move forward hearing from OPD.
Okay, let's go,
give me one
Ms.
second. So
Jenks.
give me 1 second so I can get them unmuted. There we are. Okay. All right, Ms. Jenks.
Good evening. I would encourage the ad hoc to consider the broadest possible definition, even beyond DHS. What I've seen this administration do is use agents from other offices, from other departments, from other agencies in a very kind of fluid way. So I don't think that you can necessarily anticipate that they might not send FBI agents to work on what is essentially DHS work or any other federal agents. And the other thing is, I really appreciate Mr. Malouf's work. Part of our concern and what we hear from many community organizations and community members is that a lot of the discussions to this point have been very duplicative. And so we keep kind of restating the same ground in terms of what's going to happen inside city buildings, et cetera. And what we believe this ad hoc has to do is move beyond those points into a substantive discussion that also provides police officers who are on the ground with very clear instructions about what they are supposed to be doing when they encounter these situations.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Jenks. Ms. Cleveland? You're muted.
It was sort of hard for me to take in all of what the Inspector General was saying. I was wondering, is there a way he could identify in his memo or his research how the three main issues that the community raises has been addressed? And those three main issues are: will OPD verify the identity and credentials of people claiming to be federal agents? Will OPD do crowd and traffic control to support ICE? And will OPD investigate and enforce the law when there's possible ICE involvement in a crime?
Okay, I'd like to put that on hold because I think those are good things that we need to discuss. I want to get started on discussing them today, but we have to address the kind of baseline thing, which are the Inspector General's recommendations, and try to get that to our attorney. So if it's okay with you, Ms. Cleveland, what I'd like to do is just put those thoughts on hold for a minute, hear from OPD on the Inspector General's report, memo, whatever you want to call it, and then at that point entertain a motion and get that sent over, not as the definitive statement, but just as the first piece that we're going to get rolling. And then we can have a fuller discussion on the 3 points you raised.
And real quick, I just saw in the chat, we have Deputy Chief Osmus for about 3 more minutes before she leaves us here. Do you have any parting thoughts, DC? And then I could touch base with you offline after this meeting as well to discuss next steps, because we have a couple of meetings to make some decisions. So I just wanted to see just kind of give you the mic before you depart.
No problem. I'm just trying to confirm that public safety was canceled. If it was canceled, then I'll stay. And if it wasn't, then I will be leaving shortly. So with that, I absolutely appreciate Inspector General's review, putting in the definitions that's in the So just for everybody's understanding, and the way OPD did their policy is if it was identified in the administrative instruction, or if it's identified in the sanctuary city, now the sanctuary city refuge policy or ordinance, then we didn't reiterate it. But to make it easier, identifying and explaining what a judicial versus an administrative warrant for officers, that's absolutely fine. Those are no issues. Putting in some of the other correcting, obviously the miscited penal code obviously needs to be fixed. So all of these are fairly simple identifications. So I just want to make sure everybody understands. So obviously ICE using OPD property is not allowed by the administrative instruction or city ordinance. You can't use any city-owned property. ICE is not allowed to have it. The definitions for the different ICE agencies, just if it needs to be better, or if everybody would feel but more comfortable, on the first page under the Immigration and Customs, in the second paragraph, we identified the different agencies that may be affiliated with Department of Homeland Security. So we do have Customs and Border Patrol. We do have the U.S. Immigration and Customs, ICE specifically, DHS, but we can redefine, we can do a little bit of tweaking on that as well, depending on how the attorneys want to look at it. I'll leave that up to attorneys because that's what they're really good at. So we can work on that as well. So there's nothing in here that we can't work with or deal with, right? So we'll just keep moving forward, and what everybody's try and get as much as we can, so it's a very cohesive group ad hoc policy like we like to do, Chair. So I hope that's a little bit helpful. I hope it helps everybody understand when we write policy, if it's already or if it's addressed in a city administration instruction or policy, we reference it, right? So we're not reiterating, and we're not making a 500-page policy that re-stipulates or re-examines everything that's already in the city policy, because we're also held accountable to that as well, not just our own policies. But we can absolutely add a handful of things in there. I don't have an issue with that.
Okay, great. Any other comments? Okay, well, at this point, then I'd entertain a motion from the other ad hoc committee members to request the OIG to forward his memo to our council and to direct our council to incorporate the points raised by our Inspector General into her drafting of the policy.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Does OPD have the memo or the recommendation submitted by Councilmember Wong, as well as the police accountability? Do you all have those?
Yes.
And IG, did you take a look at the recommendations provided by the coalition?
Yeah, thank you. And then another clarification. So not only did I include Councilmember Wang, but also included the Coalition of Police Accountabilities areas as well. We did take a look at that, and that's also incorporated. Specifically, Ms. Cleveland was talking about ICE. I think she said ICE facilities that or traffic control. That's actually addressed in one of my 6 points as well.
Okay, do we have a second on the motion?
Second.
Okay, any more discussion?
I have a clarifying question on the motion. Are we
I'd expect nothing less.
are we going to be directing our council to incorporate some of this into the existing policy? Because in the past, OPD has kind of taken lead of kind of drafting our recommendations that we've worked on and kind of taking ownership over their own policy, or are we drafting recommendations for the commission to consider for OPD to draft into the policy?
Well, you raise a good point, and you're kind of the chief person responsible for the police commission. So I'd throw it back on you and say, what do you think the most effective way to go is? I mean, I prefer having it drafted for the police commission because as I've expressed before, I'm very big on having things be publicly vetted when they when they are put into a form where they could become policy. I'm very big on having it publicly vetted. So I think if it's drafted for the police commission, it just provides one more opportunity for input. And I think it carries more weight too. If we adopt it as a policy, it's a policy. But I'll leave that to you, Ricardo. You know more. You know, I'm still a relative neophyte here.
Yeah, because I think even if we did that, OPD would still have to bring it back to the city attorney and they would still have to have eyes on it. So the way we've done it in the past, we just lost Lisa, but like the way we did it with the pursuit policy is a good example, I think, is that they had presented a policy, we had some ideas and recommendations like this, right? And then what OPD actually ended up doing was rescinding their initial memo that started our clock with their policy. And they said, we're going to go back and work with the ad hoc to incorporate these recommendations and then present a new policy with these recommendations to the commission. And then the clock starts again for us to be able to approve or give any other further input at that point. Natasha, that was your recommend. So essentially, if we vote for we could present a document that has all of our recommendations and have the commission vote on those recommendations. And if OPD agrees to go back and work on that policy, then they have the voted on recommendations for them to start incorporating and working with the ad hoc to incorporate. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's too bad that we lost the deputy chief right when we did, because if she could advise us on, because if she, like what I heard her say was that all of the recommendation in the IG's memo were ones that, from her perspective, OPD would like to see also improved in the policy. If she's able to incorporate those, then in the time before our July 23rd board meeting, the policy you're considering then it can be approved, quote unquote, as opposed to rejected, because our timeline does not change unless they withdraw. And even that, is subject to some interpretation, but that they would withdraw their policy to stop our clock. But otherwise, we have to take action to adopt or reject by on the 23rd.
Okay. So
we still have OPD representation on the call, just so you all know.
Wonderful.
Jason is here, and so is Michelle Kwan.
Yeah.
Awesome. Maybe they could, I don't know if they're able to speak to that, like the process.
So I think if we keep everything within the report, I think those can all be put into the policy fairly easily. I don't think anybody would be against, as Chair Grillo is asking, to have your attorneys draft or maybe even suggest some of the language to be incorporated. I think if we work kind of together on that, I think we can get the policy through to you by the 23rd. It's just a fast turnaround.
Yeah. The only challenge with the 23rd is that we would have to agendize it by Monday, the document. So it's even a faster turnaround than we would think. But potentially, if the ad hoc and OPD was all in agreement, including OPD was all in agreement with maybe some of the suggestions that we start with, right, and vote on as a commission, then to Natasha's point, council's point, could we approve the policy with these recommendations? Then essentially we're approving a policy with some recommendations. Then OPD would then, because at some point the city attorney would have to look at that for it to become policy, right? I mean, for it to be fine.
We're talking an issue of federalism right there. I haven't weighed in on that one yet, Ricardo, and I won't today.
Okay. Either way, I think if we just make progress with these recommendations, we could talk offline, and then hopefully by the end of tomorrow's meeting, we'll have a little bit better direction of where we're going. But I think what's going to be important is looking at this stuff and hearing from the community if there's still some additional things that we would want to incorporate for our council to start drafting these recommendations, or how that would look in that policy.
But if you do want to complete the motion that you have on the table, I'll at least take it as direction that regardless of the format, the direction of the ad hoc is to incorporate these into a policy, and we can label it the appropriate thing at that time.
We can figure out a lot between now and tomorrow, Ricardo. So
Okay.
let's just get our vote on the motion. All in favor?
So,
Aye.
Sorry, you have a hand raised from Commissioner Ordaz.
Yes. So there are still some key questions that haven't been answered, and some of them are posted in the chat. There's a few items that weren't addressed in the IG memo. Are we going to do this again? So we're going to send the policy, it will be revised, and then it's going to come back to this group for us to discuss those issues. I don't think we've resolved all the things that have been raised.
No, it's clearly we haven't, but in order to give our council an opportunity and the time to start putting pen to paper, I want to get that Inspector General's report over there so she can start working on it, and then we can raise all of the other issues that have been raised by you, and I think Ann Jenks raised one, and I'd like to get started on those discussions today. But I want to get some momentum going so that we actually have something that we can send out.
So can you clarify the motion then?
Yeah, the motion is to have the Inspector General forward his memorandum to our council and instruct our council to start drafting language to incorporate into the immigration policy that adopts the Inspector General's recommendations. So that part of it, we get rolling, so to speak. That's the motion.
So does there need to be something in the motion that it will come back to this ad hoc for further discussion, and not that those changes are final?
I think that's the point Ricardo is raising. I think practically speaking, it will have to come back, but we have to get something to have come back first before we can discuss
Sure.
it. That's a problem.
Totally understand that. I guess I'm saying we should clarify the motion to say that it will come back here so that the public knows that this is not the final edits to the policy, but that there's still key issues that will be addressed in this body after those initial amendments are made.
The motion does not contemplate that this will be the policy. The motion contemplates that our council starts drafting language for incorporation into the policy based on the Inspector General's report. That's the essence of the motion.
and if I'm not mistaken, once we get that through, we can start having discussion of the greater discussion, and there may be additional things that we may want a motion to also incorporate as well. But at least we'll have a starting point, and this is just to authorize our council to begin the process of incorporating these initial recommendations, but certainly not to come up with the final product. And we still have another meeting tomorrow.
Okay, did we vote on it, or was the?
Do we have a second?
Right,
If not, I'll second.
Who seconded it?
You did have one? Okay.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. All right. Natasha, do you have your work cut out for you?
Yeah,
With
and-
the assistance of our Inspector General's report. So, we don't have a lot of time, so.
Got it. No problem. I have your memo. Thank you so much.
All right. Now, we had some other issues that were raised. Commissioner, Ad hoc Commissioner Salto, you raised a couple. Why don't you restate those? And then we had a couple that were raised by some community members. So why don't you go first?
The one that I raised is sort of what happens when ICE commits a crime. How will OPD respond? And whether that needs to be in this policy or whether that's elsewhere. And then also just lifting up all of the recommendations that have that were in the letter from the coalition, as well as Councilmember Wong.
Okay. Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, and then Judge Greer, I think, between Commissioner Greer, between last meeting and this meeting, we've heard common themes around crowd control, traffic stops, and it's one thing to allude to administrative instructions, right? But we want to be very clear with our OPD policy so that officers know exactly what is our OPD policy, how does that interpret and say and codify what these other greater policies are saying, right? Because there's a lot of language in those executive orders, and I think we need to be very specific around crowd control, traffic stops. If we see any type of like violence, verifying ICE. I think there's a question around how do we identify the credentials of ICE. Some of these things may be mentioned in other policies, but from what I remember hearing from our last meeting, from the notes, is that we need to be very specific on some of these things as it pertains to traffic stops, crowd control, and illegal activity by ICE.
Yeah, it's there's been some reporting in the press the last couple of days about investigations that are being conducted on the state level relating to ICE activities, specifically fatalities. There's a state investigation going on in Minnesota, I believe in Houston also, and I think there's one other city, might even be a California city down south, where this is happening. I'm not sure what they're doing or what process is being used. But maybe that's something we should take a look at. My concern in terms of a policy where we are providing direction to OPD officers is that we don't say anything or do anything that would be suggesting that the city would be authorizing interference with the duties of federal officers, no matter how odious they may be. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, you can get in a lot of trouble. That's the obvious one. But then the second reason, in my view, is more political, is I don't want to give this administration any excuse or whiff of an excuse to send troops here, which, if the policy could be read to allow our local police force to interfere with a federal police force, would be the logical and predictable outcome of that. So I've kind of thrown that out there. Those are my thoughts, and all of you have a lot of good thoughts, and so this is the time to share them.
We have two community members with their hands up.
Right. Millie Cleveland, would you like to speak?
Yes, I understand the political concerns you have about not wanting to attract the attention of Trump. But the reality is, ICE is here. ICE was in Hayward just a couple of days ago. So the deal is, we have an obligation in this city to make sure our people are protected and are not being subjected to illegal activities. So I understand your concern, but people are scared and people are being snatched by ICE. So we can't just have our police stand back and watch this. Also, the other day, it was reported in our last ad hoc that the OPD was escorting ICE off of Eastmont Mall property. Why are they doing that? They know how to drive and get to the street. So I I understand your concern, but we need to know who these guys are. We need our cops to be able to at least ask them for identification. Now, if the feds turn around and say, go to hell and get away from me, then OPD might have to stand down. But the idea that we're not even going to inquire or request identification or request a copy of a warrant to interaction doesn't have to be interference. That's what I want to say.
Okay. Ms. Jenks?
I'm sorry, I was waiting for the little box telling me that I could unmute myself. So the problem always when you're interacting with erratic, unpredictable people or institutions is that it's kind of like when you're in a dysfunctional relationship, you can try really hard to not. This article saying that people in Oakland are cooking cats and dogs and they can decide to come anyway. So it seems to me that all we can do is figure out what works for Oakland and not worry about things that we have absolutely no control over. And what the federal government decides to do really is very much outside of our control. And they're way too erratic for that to, in my mind, be a consideration of rational people. I would also point out that Denver has put some good language in, and that has not thus far gotten the attention of the federal government.
I missed the lesson you just said, Ms. Jenks. Could you repeat that?
That Denver put some new language in, and that has not seemed to attract the kind of attention from the federal government that you're concerned about. The other problem is the judge, the chair was mentioning, kind of whether something is a state investigation or a local investigation. Certainly, if the state wants to come in and take over an investigation, as they have done in other instances, then I think that's going to happen. But the problem is that OPD officers are going to be the first people on the ground, and they need to have instruction as to whether they're supposed to be preserving evidence, if they're supposed to be collecting information and identifying witnesses and submitting information that's short of murder to the DA when they witness crimes. There were crimes that were committed the last time there was a big surge where there were photos of the ICE agent shooting the minister in the face with a less lethal weapon. And I don't believe that OPD did anything with that. Obviously there was information. We need specific understanding of what is going to happen before the state takes over an investigation or for less than murder crimes.
Let me ask you a question, Ms. Jenks.
Yes, sir.
I'm listening to what you're saying, and I think there's 2 or 3 issues here. Let me clarify one thing about what I said. I'm not just concerned with how the withdrawing attention or how the federal, or getting the ire of the federal government up. We're dealing with a very erratic, oftentimes illegal federal presence and with federal actions. So I'm not so naive as to think that those aren't going to continue. Part of what's underlying what I'm saying is the only federal institution that seems to provide any restraint against federal actions right now is the courts, the federal courts. And I just don't want to put anything in whatever policy we adopt that's going to give us, instead of a leg up, a leg down with the courts. I think it's really important because if you look at how the courts have reacted to what ICE and what the Trump administration is doing, we're doing real well winning in the courts until we get to the Supreme Court. And that's something, that helps us, and that might get us through the next 2 years. That's my first point. My second point is, to the extent what you are proposing is that the fact that it is ICE or a federal agent undertaking some activity should not relieve the individual police officers of their obligations to report and document crimes that they observe. I agree with that. It's just a matter of how we put the language together so that it's real clear that that's what we're doing, and that it can't be twisted into we're doing something to interfere with legitimate federal activities, as few as may be occurring these days. Does that offer any clarity, Ms. Jenks?
It does, sir. And I wish I had your optimism that things, if they were clear enough, could not be twisted.
Well, I have no optimism in that regard, none.
But the only other thing, I'm really glad to hear you say that we need to find language so that we can give our officers the understanding that there is an expectation that they are engaging when they see crime. The last thing that I just wanted to say in terms of what it seems to us needs to be in this policy, and this has to do with months of asking OPD, what's the policy? What are the specific instructions that officers are receiving? And what is their training? And I think that getting those answers is really necessary to as the baseline in terms of addressing what policies are being put in place, because we've gotten answers that suggest different things at different times. But the last thing I want to say is, one of the reasons that we believe it's so important to have a specific policy is not only because it's just not fair to the OPD officers to be put into very complex situations without pretty clear policies in place, but also because we have heard repeatedly from different officers that some OPD officers are pleased to have ICE in Oakland. And they are pleased because they say ICE can do what we are not allowed to do. And for those officers in particular, they need to know that their actions are constrained and that they are expected to act as OPD officers under the policies that are written. And if we don't write clear policies and we don't provide them with clear training, they don't have to follow any of the rules.
Okay, point well taken. Anyone else?
Yes, I have my hand raised. This is Risa Jaffe. I think Ann Jenks and Millie said a lot of what I wanted to say, and I want to just reiterate one of the problems that I see is that there's an assumption that those unmarked vehicles and those masked people are federal officers, and we don't know that. So this policy has to be clear that OPD does not need to make that assumption. They need to verify. There's no interference with a federal officer if it's not been confirmed. That's a federal officer. Thank you.
Well, here's my take on that. I'm a big proponent of only picking fights that you can win. And I don't like to go out and pick fights that you can't win. And if we adopt a policy which were to say, for example, Oakland police officers, if you see what purports to be or what is immigration enforcement, you're to stop those officers and demand identification. We've just shot ourselves in the foot and the head. I think there's a way around that with language. I think our officers are probably pretty good at detecting, based on their training, when there is something occurring under the false authority of immigration. In other words, it's not really an immigration activity. I think that's something that has to be left up to the individual officer, because if you tell them you have to go get between them and the people who they have a warrant for, the people that are arresting and demand identification, that's just a non-starter. It's a loser.
Well, I hear your point. And what we see more frequently is police helping with traffic control and getting in the way of people who are protesting in support of ICE, of people who have not identified that they're there for any legitimate person. So, at a minimum, if there's clear instruction of that's not happening, that would help.
In concept, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I think that that instructions to the individual police officers that they are not to derogate First Amendment rights of protest in the name of assisting ICE in a manner that they're prohibited to do. I think that's kind of that's a no-brainer.
The problem is that it's not, they don't say it to help ICE. They say, oh, it's for public safety. And my point is, no, that's not public safety. Those protesters are doing public safety. Just another way to think about it. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? We're starting to get to. We were supposed to go till 6:30, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's give it another 5 minutes. We'll run over a little, and then we're having another meeting tomorrow. We've got some things to think about. I certainly will think about, what type of language we could request or suggest to address some of these concerns. But I think we would all agree that it's a rather delicate dance that we're doing, where we talk about protecting Oakland residents to the maximum extent possible, while at the same time not interfering with federalism, federal concerns. But we can talk about that some more. Does anyone else want to raise anything at this time?
I would like us to clarify that interaction alone does not constitute interference. And that even if OPD is present, they could still have an obligation to video the interaction, to take pictures of the people that are being detained. Simply asking the federal agents, could you show us your identification, or where are you taking people? Or may I ask, do you have a warrant? Why does that have to be considered interference? We're not stopping them. We are simply asking our cops to inquire with the federal agents what they're doing and who they are. So I really want to push back over the concept of talking to a federal agent is interference.
Yeah, well, I agree that talking is not interference. As to the other issues you raised, I'm not on board with that. I think that's the delicate dance that I'm talking about, and I do not want to set up a situation where an Oakland police officer who follows a policy that we've set gets snatched up by ICE and thrown in with the people he's supposed to protect or she's supposed to protect and carted away. I do not want to see that. And if they do that, it just creates a whole host of problems, and I don't want to see that.
But it's okay for the community to be snatched up?
Judge?
No, it's not. And that's a battle that has to be fought on many fronts. But it's also not okay to put your police officers in a position where, as I said last time we were here, they have a Hobson's choice of either violating an OPD policy or violating some type of federal restriction or law. You can't put your police officers in that position.
Judge,
So let me just let it be said that it's a delicate dance, and it's one we're going to have to figure out pretty quickly with a lot of give and take and a lot of cooperation, I think.
there are existing policies for OPD that instruct officers to attempt something, and it doesn't mean that they are able to accomplish it. They try to pull over cars, for example, and there are certain things that cars can do, and in certain situations, they do not successfully pull that car over, and they are not violating the policy. The policy instructs them to attempt. It does not instruct them to accomplish it.
That analogy, in my view, doesn't fit when you're talking about interface with the federal government. Now, we're running out of time here. I think, Ms. Salto, you had your hand up. You had one more thing you wanted to say.
I have more than one thing to say, so this may need to be carried over to the next meeting, but I'm interested in hearing from OPD. What are your reactions to what the community has raised and whether that is feasible based on what you all hold and managing on your end? So I don't know if we have time to go through the whole list, but I do want to ask, did OPD escort ICE at any point, as it was alleged in a call?
What was that? The last thing I missed what you said.
Did OPD escort ICE?
A community member in our last meeting said that they were escorted off of Eastmont Mall's property. So I assumed that they would use their cars. And
Were they ICE though? Were they ICE?
I
That's
don't
what
think
was alleged.
that's what was alleged. We had DC Osmonds look into that. And I don't know the exact answer. It was not ICE. I don't know if it was some other kind of federal operation that was going on. You know, often there's either Vice or other task force, other, you know, gun related type stuff that's not immigration enforcement. But she did follow up with that, and it was not ICE, but I don't want to speak out of turn of what it actually was. But I want to lift up one thing you did say. I want to call you Carelli, past commissioner Salto, ad hoc member Salto. I think you bring a good point around hearing from OPD, and what I was hoping is that, you know, we've had some good discussions. There's been 2 discussions now to process. I do want to spend in tomorrow's meeting some significant time hearing from OPD on some of these issues, because I think there are also from my understanding of how things work and some commitments that I've heard, there are some assumptions I think that we do need clarified. And I think OPD is you know, I'm trusting that they're working in the right direction on some of these things. For instance, you know, if a crime is committed, I understand, you know, we just recently had another person killed by ICE, you know, so these aren't like just theoretical things. These are things that are happening in the communities right now. And in a case like that, it's my understanding, you know, that it would be, you know, that they would go through all the process of a homicide investigation, whether it be body cam footage that would get turned over, things like that, because, you know, somebody was critically injured, you know, on Oakland property, Oakland City property. So I do think there are a number of things that we do need to hear from the police. Oh, and we have hand up right now, but I know we're short on time, and I don't want to put you all on the spot with short amount of time. So I would, you know, appreciate if OPD had some conversations and kind of reflected on some of the conversations that we've had today, and then maybe give some significant time to hear from, you know, DC Osmus, and also
Jason is here. Jason has his hand up from OPD.
Okay. Yeah, and I was just gonna ask. I always forget as a lieutenant.
All right, let's do this. We'll take the chair's prerogative will recognize Officers Scudant, and then we will close out today and table these things till tomorrow. How does that sound? Jason?
Okay, so just a couple of things, sir. I just did a quick Google search. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department has a pretty good directive for their deputies when they encounter unidentified or unID'd ICE agents on how to handle those situations. And it includes addressing essentially counter protests, if you will, for lack of a better term. And secondary to that would be that anytime that we interact with other law enforcement agencies, especially in that type of situation, we are going to activate our body-worn cameras to record the interactions. That's always been the direction that watch commanders, including myself, when I was a watch commander out east, would give to our folks. Just in the interest of recording the interactions, it protects us, protects the public, and I think those are easy to accomplish goals. I do like the look of this Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department outline, though. Might be something worth looking for.
Could you send that to Micah? Could you send that to Micah so she can circulate it before tomorrow's meeting?
Of course. I unfortunately won't be able to see this through because this is my last meeting as I'm retiring, but I think it would be it seems like a reasonable policy, and I'll send it to Micah.
All right, thank you so much.
Chair Grillo, just before Jason leaves, Lisa was going to mention it, but she didn't get a chance. Michelle Kwan, who's also here, she's from OPD. She's listening tonight, but she's probably going to be one of the main representatives from OPD for this.
Welcome, Michelle. We look forward to working with you, and we will talk some more tomorrow. Okay, is there anything else that we have to bring up now before we adjourn?
I would love for us to have an agenda for tomorrow's conversation. I didn't see one for today, and I apologize if I missed it, but putting in buckets the key things that need to be resolved can help us meet this short deadline that we need to meet. So I would highly encourage us, and I'm happy to help. I did take a little notes here, just so that we can stay organized and stay on track. And I would also appreciate OPD responding to the items, the recommendations in both Councilmember Wang's report or memo and the coalition. And we'd love to hear your thoughts as to what is feasible and what is not and why.
Where is Councilmember Wang's memo?
It's in the resource link.
Is it in the pack? Is it in the pack? Okay, all right. Then I've seen it then.
And whatever Jason sends me, I'm going to upload to that as well. So that's
all right. And I'll talk to you offline about seeing if we can put together an agenda for tomorrow. I think that's a good. I think that's a good suggestion. I don't think we really had time this time due to the 4th of July, holiday and the speed with which everything happened. All right, folks. We'll see you tomorrow at 5:30. Thank you.
Bye.
Chair, could you stay on for just a moment?